Since the Revolutionary War, African Americans have served in every American conflict, albeit in segregated units. Black units frequently served with distinction. The 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry during the American Civil War, who were among some 178,985 African Americans who donned Union blue during the conflict. The 9th and the 10th U.S. Colored Cavalry Regiments during the Indian Wars and the Spanish-American War, and the 369th Infantry Regiment during World War II all established outstanding fighting records. With the U.S. entry into World War II, 909,000 Black African Americans were selected for duty in the Army, with most Americans expecting Black soldiers to perform the same auxiliary roles, building airfields, clearing mines, unloading ships, maintaining roads and rail lines, serving as medics, and driving the trucks that supplied the armies, as the majority had in the past. It wasn't until the spring of 1944 that the U.S. government grudgingly rescinded its policy excluding Black soldiers from combat. By war's end, Black platoons had served in 10 infantry and armored divisions in the European theater of operation. In the summer of 1945, the Army conducted a study of the Black platoons and interviewed some 250 officers and 1,700 enlisted men who had fought with or alongside Black soldiers. They were the best platoon in the regiment, one company commander said. I wish I could get a presidential citation for them. They are very aggressive as fighters, really good in woods and at close quarters work, said another officer. The only trouble is getting them to stop. They just keep pushing. Despite their service to their nation, Black soldiers remained separate, with even their blood being segregated for transfusions in the field based on race. Following the fall of Nazi Germany and the unconditional surrender of the Empire of Japan in the Pacific in 1945, Black soldiers returning home believed that they were owed the same equality granted to every other citizen under the Constitution. In that quest, Black men and women found a strange ally in President Harry Truman. Born nearly 20 years after the end of the Civil War, the Missouri farm boy was raised by Confederate sympathizers for parents, with Truman's own mother, Martha Ellen Young, telling her son upon a visit to the White House many years later that she'd rather sleep on the floor than stay in the Lincoln bedroom. Truman's own transformation was dramatic. For instance, in a June 22, 1911 love letter to his future wife, Truman basically declared that he was a racist. I think one man is just as good as another so long as he's honest and decent and not an N-word or a Chinaman. Uncle will say that the Lord made a white man from dust, an N-word from mud, and then threw what was left, and it came down a Chinaman. He does hate Chinese and Japs, so do I. It is a race prejudice, I guess, but I am strongly of the opinion that Negroes ought to be in Africa, yellow men in Asia, and white men in Europe and America. Yet upon ascending to the presidency in 1945 after FDR's death, Truman's tone had softened. My stomach turned over when I learned that Negro soldiers just back from overseas were being dumped out of Army trucks in Mississippi and beaten. Whatever my inclinations as a native of Missouri might have been, as president, I know this is bad. I shall fight to end evils like this. The president became particularly disturbed after learning of the attack on Isaac Woodard, a Black World War II veteran who was pulled off a bus in Batesburg, South Carolina, hours after he was honorably discharged from the U.S. Army and beaten and blinded by the police chief in February 1946. From that point on, according to historian Carrie Frederickson, Truman took a different tact. On December 5, 1946, Truman issued an executive order he called Freedom from Fear, which, according to the Washington Post, created the president's Committee on Civil Rights tasked with analyzing the state of civil rights in the country, investigating mob violence, and probing legislation to protect civil rights. In a landmark speech to the members of the NAACP on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in the summer of 1947, Truman set his intentions for his last year in office.
As Americans, we believe that every man should be free to live his life as he wishes. He should be limited only by his responsibility to his fellow countrymen. If this freedom is to be more than a dream, each man must be guaranteed equality of opportunity. The only limit to an American's achievement should be his ability, his industry, and his character.
When congratulated by NAACP Executive Secretary Walter White, Truman assured him, "I said what I did because I mean every word of it, and I'm going to prove that I do mean it." On July 26, 1948, Truman put his words into action, issuing the executive orders to desegregate the military and the federal workforce. According to the National Museum of the United States Army, when asked if the order meant an end to segregation, the president simply stated, "Yes." Now, 75 years later, the anniversary of the integration of the military is celebrated with luminaries from the government and the military hailing Truman's move. In Washington, D.C., the Truman Library Institute, a nonprofit connected to the Harry S. Truman Library, hosted a 3-day symposium to mark the event. The symposium even includes remarks from America's first Black president, former President Barack Obama.
The grandson of slave owners, Harry Truman was never the most likely champion for civil rights. But during the depths of Jim Crow, he argued for racial equality, becoming the first president to address the NAACP. And when he saw Black veterans returning from World War II, only to face violence and abuse at home, he went a step further. By desegregating the federal workforce, the single largest employer in the country, President Truman set a powerful example and created new opportunities for generations of Black Americans. And by ordering the integration of the military, he advanced the civil rights movement and helped prove that America is safer when Americans fight together.